Rhea Cluster didn't introduce too many unique rulers. A lot of the set was built around the starter decks, who received a few reprints in boxes as they were updated throughout the game. This led to there being very few set-released rulers, and if you compared the amount released in each other cluster to Rhea, you can see how small the ruler pool in Rhea actually was. The choice to re-release rulers like this and continually give them support put a chokehold on set exclusives, and even made them harder to pull. Advent of the Demon King was pretty notorious for this, having Tigris, Gil, and Rhea re-released alongside Welser and Ayu, the two new set rulers. Advent of the Demon King only gave one ruler per box, and what used to be the second ruler was now taken up by a variant of Gil or Tigris with their starter deck artwork. This made Welser and Ayu exceedingly difficult to get a hold of, and you could actually pull 2 Gil or 2 Tigris from a box if you had absolutely horrible luck. Ayu and Welser's prices skyrocketed, which sucked for people wanting to play Ayu since she was actually solid, but poor Welser, well, he and his archetype are an entirely different story. Welser the Archmage is a fire ruler with a 5-cost judgment, one of each color, and the following effects. Rest a magic crest you control. Produce one attribute shared with the magic crest rested this way. You may only use this will to do this card's judgment. You may pay the cost of wicked spirits and magic crests with fire will. Welser's J-Ruler side is Welser, King of Demons, a 15/15 with several effects. When this card enters the field, you may put a wicked spirit from your hand into the field. This card gains swiftness as long as there are 3 or more different attributes among all magic crests you control. It gains imperishable and precision as long as there are 5 or more different attributes among all magic crests you control. Whenever this card enters the field or attacks, put 3 -100/-100 counters on all J resonators your opponent controls. So, for one of the most complex judgment costs, you get the highest printed stats on a J ruler, a poor man's final battle, and a cheat-in. Despite his big body and potential to gain swiftness, the Demon King essentially bricks your hand to do so. He loses the ability to play spirits and crests with fire, so you're stuck relying exclusively on him outside of a few fringe resonator options. Between his huge stats, high cost, and potential board wipe, Welser's design seems to be almost exclusively for getting the kill, which makes it odd for him to have imperishable. At least to me it is. It's really hard to talk about this guy without examining the rest of his archetype though, so we're going to come back and revisit him later. Magic Crests are a set of addition cards that provide different effects outside of their weird will production gimmick with Welser. Light Crest is a 1-cost that puts 4 1/1 counters distributed as you want on resonators you control. Fire does 600 damage to a resonator. Water lets you draw a card. Wind puts the top card of your stone deck into play. And Darkness lets you add a resonator from your graveyard to your hand. None of these effects are too particularly interesting or synergize with each other. That's about all there is to say about the crests though, so I guess we're going to move on to the resonators now. Wicked Spirits. While there are plenty of wicked spirits, let's go ahead and get the terrible ones out of the way first. Light Majin, Fire Majin, Water Majin, Wind Majin, and Darkness Majin. All of them have subpar to standard stats for their cost, and each of them has an enter ability tied to the Crest keyword. Crest is exclusive to Welser's archetype, and it simply states that you gain the associated effect as long as you control a magic crest of a matching attribute when the resonator enters the field. You'd think these effects would have to be pretty powerful since they require a secondary condition to happen, and you'd be absolutely wrong. Most of the Majin's effects are just copies or slight retrains of their respective crests, except for Darkness who thought he could be cool. There's almost no direction you can take Welser in where any of these cards actually work to his benefit, and in general they're just cloggy weak bodies that will probably never land their effects against a competent opponent. All hope is not lost though. Force of Wilco actually had the foresight to give Welser 7 other Wicked Spirits to use, and some of these can actually do things. I'm going to be going in order of cost here. Spawn of Beelzebub is a 1-cost Darkness Resonator with 300 attack, 300 defense, and puts 2 -100/-100 counters on a resonator when it's sent from the field to the graveyard. Short, sweet, and sort of solid. Spawn doesn't do much to directly benefit Welser, but it does have some cute combos with a few of his other cards. Stat-wise it's decent, but -200 isn't going to kill much, and your instant speed options to banish things were severely limited at the time of its release. This card just kind of exists, which is a problem you'll see a lot of Wicked Spirits have. They're not particularly bad, but they're not really good either. They're pretty fair, but fair is the last thing you want in a card game. Alright, moving on to 2 costs. First we have Lava Majin, a 6/5 fire resonator with 1 automatic ability. Whenever this card takes damage, it deals damage equal to that amount to target J Resonator. Much like Spawn, this is just another card with a very average effect and stats. It makes for a decent blocker attacker since it'll most likely kill anything it gets into combat with, but you're probably better off just running Resonator Destruction instead. The other 2-cost spirit is Freyla, Servant of Demon Fire, a 6/6 fire resonator with 2 effects. First, if you control no other resonators when she enters the field, she gains Swiftness. Then, whenever she attacks, you can boost another resonator you control by 400 attack and grant it Swiftness till the end of turn, but that resonator is then banished at the end of the turn. Her inherent Swiftness gain makes her a decent turn 2 play if you lose your turn 1 or simply didn't play anything into the field. And her boost effect to other resonators can lead to potentially high damage swings or set up cards with graveyard triggers. So Freyla is actually a pretty good card, so much so she's seen competitive play and is still a splash option in some Keurig decks. Ideally you would want to swing with her, boost something, and then use Play Dead on it so that when it leaves the field it'll re-enter. Even outside of Lizard Boy, she's probably one of the better generic fire cards in the format. Alright, skipping 3 costs, because there are none. The first 4 cost is Crumbling Majin, a 9/9 Darkness Resonator that forces your opponent to discard when it's sent from the field to the graveyard. No. Just no. I get the idea of trying to synergize with Freyla, but these stats and this effect for this cost? No. You could honestly get more bang for your buck by playing a 1-cost discard card and then dropping a 3-cost of just about anything else onto the field. Okay, our next 4-cost is the Welser copy, or the Welser molecule if you're using Gacha-Log. A 9/8 Wicked Spirit with the following effect. This card gains 200/200 for each other Wicked Spirit you control. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. This is the card the Archetype had been dying for. A useless beater with a situational boost and 0 protection. Yeah, no, don't use this one either. It's cute since it can get a boost from a flipped J-Ruler Welser, but there are so many better options for 4-drops, including our next Resonator. Elixir is the last of the 4-cost Wicked Spirits. She's a 10/10 body with 2 effects. Crest Fire. This card deals 600 damage to each Resonator your opponent controls. Crest Darkness. Destroy target Resonator. Even if she's a powerhouse among Majins, Elixir is still a little underwhelming compared to her contemporaries. As I said before, Crest as a symbol skill is pretty underwhelming. None of the Crest-related effects are particularly worth giving up resources for to slap down said Crests, but at least the design team picked 2 of the cheaper and more useful colors for Elixir though. 600 damage to all Resonators is decent. It probably won't clear much on turn 4, but there are certain ways to get Elixir out earlier that we'll get into later. The Resonator Destruction effect is okay as well. I'd rather have it been a non-targeting form of removal, such as forcing your opponents to banish something instead, because then at least the effect wouldn't be able to backfire on you. You see, if your opponent doesn't control any Resonators, and you have a Darkness Crest on the field and you play Elixir, if you don't control anything else, you now have to have Elixir kill herself. Alright, now for the last Wicked Spirit. Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies. A 5-cost 15/15 Darkness Resonator with Flying and the following effects. When this card enters the field, it gains 5 -100/-100 counters. You may move a -100/-100 counter from this card to another target Resonator. If a Resonator with a -100/-100 counter on it goes to the graveyard, put a -100/-100 counter on this card. Much like Freyla, this one is actually good and also saw some competitive level play. 15/15 is one of the highest cost to body ratios on a 5-drop, and even if his effect puts him at 10/10 when he enters, it's not too hard to get him up to his full amount. His ability to weaken things can greatly hamper aggro decks, forcing them to think carefully about their next move, since any of their cards can suddenly become 500 attack or defense weaker. This is the guy you would ideally want to slap in with Welser, since Welser's negative ability fuels Beelzebub's by giving everything your opponent controls negative counters from the get-go. There are several chants that feature Welser in some of his crew, but I'm only going to cover ones that directly support either him or his archetype. Just being featured in the card artwork doesn't really mean that it's for Welser. The first of these is Majin Subjugation, a 1-cost fire chant that requires you to banish a Resonator as an additional cost. Search your deck for a Wicked Spirit with total cost equal to or less than of X plus 2, where X is the cost of the Resonator banished to play this card. This is actually pretty nutty. A tutor that scales its search target is pretty unique. It's just a shame there aren't many Wicked Spirits worth going into. You could honestly build an entire deck around Beelzebub, making this your primary way to turbo him out. This card doesn't help Welser very much though. Using this to pull anything outside of Beelzebub or Freyla implies you've been able to properly set up your Magic Crest, which chances are you aren't going to be able to do. Our next one cost was a quick cast chant released for Welser in the very last set of the cluster, Prismatic Flame. You may pay the awakening cost of this card by resting a Magic Crest that shares an attribute with that awakening cost. Awakening Light. Whenever this card deals damage, you gain that much life. Fire. All damage this card deals is doubled. Water. Draw a card. Wind. This card deals 100 damage to each J-Resonator your opponent controls other than this card's initial target. Darkness. This card deals 300 damage plus an additional 100 damage for each J-Resonator your opponent controls other than this card's target to your opponent. And then this card deals 300 damage to target J-Resonator. Jesus, what a mouthful. I don't think this card is actually that bad. 2 red for 600 damage is pretty standard, and the other options only enhance what the card does. Hell, with something like Null Magic Stone, you can have a dual burn spell that does 1200 total damage at minimum that only gets bigger the wider a field your opponent has. To kind of put this into perspective, if your opponent has 3 Resonators on the field, you'll deal 1000 non-targeting damage for 3 will to your opponent if you use the Fire and Darkness Awakenings. Honestly, I think this is a rather overlooked card, but not without reason. Kirik is the most popular Fire Ruler by far, and his deck space is already pretty tight. A non-searchable chant that's only cost efficient in the mid to late game really doesn't do much for him. Isis or Fuji, on the other hand, could probably benefit a lot from this card since they're aimed at a more passive and mid-rangey style. Hell, this card can put in a decent amount of work against Brunhild in the late game if she attempts to go wide with a bunch of revive effects. Our next chant is Fire Wave, a 5-cost card that does 1200 damage to all Resonators your opponent controls, but you can reduce its total cost by 2 void if you banish a Wicked Spirit with it. A 12-cost board wipe for 3 is pretty solid, outside of the fact there were so many counterspells in the game when it was printed. The Wicked Spirit cost sort of sucks. While there really aren't many you'd absolutely want to keep on the board, only one has an effect that triggers when it hits the grave. For an archetype that seems to center its chance on banishing, they really don't have many effects to capitalize on it. In a dedicated Wicked Spirit build, this is probably a 2 of, but there's no real reason to run this in most other red decks. The last Welser-specific chant is Advent of the Demon King, a 3-cost darkness card that lets you choose between either inflicting -5/-5 to all J-Resonators your opponent controls, or reducing the judgment cost of your ruler to 0 if it's Welser. It's almost like they knew Welser's judgment requirement was ridiculously stupid, but instead of fix him, they just made this as a band-aid. Needless to say, if you're flipping Welser over, it's more likely because you played this card than you actually have 5 different will sources. Outside of this, the 500 neg to your opponent's field is hardly worth 3 will at chance speed only, especially when an arguably better field neg was still available. If anything, this card should have just given both effects. Who cares if it's a -8 total with 1500 on your opponent's field? They're playing Welser, give them a goddamn bone. So in my infinite wisdom, I actually forgot 2 support cards for Welser that I didn't catch until post-production. In my defense, they're kind of underwhelming. But against my defense, what in this archetype isn't? Okay, first is Evil Dragon Hellblaze, a 12/12 flying 5-cost that searches 2 magic crests from the deck and puts them into your hand. First, why is this not a Wicked Spirit? Second, why are you putting the crests in the hand? I kinda get it, you could search up 2 Wind Crests and go crazy on Stone Ramp if they hit in the field, but you could easily fix that by changing the effect to say, up to 2 crests with different names. It's kind of depressing. Hellblaze has some great artwork, and it's wasted away on a Resonator that's too costly for its own deck. Okay, the other one I skipped is Majin Stone. This is Welser's specific magic stone that can rest to produce fire, or rest and banish itself to produce 2 fire, but that will can only be used to pay for the cost of Wicked Spirits. So, being able to turbo out parts of your archetype? Good. Giving up a potential will lead and sinking your resources for later? Not good. I guess they were struggling with what to actually do with this stone, because this isn't that much of a beneficial effect. With the small amount of Wicked Spirits that benefit from being played, getting them out a turn earlier really isn't going to put many games in your favor. While it gives you the potential to Hail Mary Freyla into a bigger body, the blowback from a move like that backfiring is you being down not only a stone, but also whatever you tried to boost with Freyla. Okay, so I made 2 separate decks for this video. One focuses on Welser, while the other is a Majin Turbo deck. The Welser deck is entirely focused on using Advent of the Demon King to flip it, because no matter what I tried, I couldn't reasonably put together a working deck with magic crests in it. Welser honestly sticks pretty well now compared to when he was printed though, so if you do get him out, he's probably going to cause some decent damage. The Majin deck is just a modified Dark Elf deck. Their own built-in recursion and setup works well with cards like Subjugation, and Beelzebub fills in the boss role that Dark Elves normally lack. Welser's biggest issue is a lack of synergy between his archetypal cards. No Majin or chant he has can reliably bring out crests. The crests have no utility outside of paying for Welser's judgment. Welser also has no way to actually protect his crests once they're on the field. Keep in mind that green alone had access to not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 total outs to additions at the time of Welser's creation. They even got one of those 4 in this set. Force of Will's design team was so concerned about Welser being too strong that they printed an addition destruction spell with Remnant when there were already multiple answers to additions in the game. If I were to try and rework Welser today, I think I'd just want to start over. I'd keep the addition concept of providing benefits on his J-Ruler side, but give him a regular non-gimmicky judgment cost. I'd also make it so crests can produce will for the costs and awakening of chance, but only if your ruler/J-Ruler is Welser. These things really need to give an extra benefit after they hit the field because their generic benefits just aren't enough to make them worth running. Change the effects of the elemental Wicked Spirits to search out their respective crests when played. There's almost no reason to run a deck full of additions in place of bodies, and giving Welser a speed boost on his addition scaling isn't going to break him compared to the other crazy garbage in this cluster. Crests can also get pretty cloggy. Right now, Welser needs to have 4 different crests on the field to successfully cast Judgment without his alternative option, so you'd obviously want to run them at a decent enough amount that you'll see them. By giving their respective Majins the ability to search, you can cut the number of crests down to something reasonable and still not give up having a body on the field to block or defend next turn. Also, give each Majin a symbol skill that matches their attribute, something, anything. Also, lastly, make these 2 jokers Wicked Spirits. I have no idea why they aren't from the start. It's not like this cluster was above teasing mechanics months before their support was introduced. Give Welser some generic Resonator options. Redcap is a decent self-searching card you can use for sacrifice outlets, and Kime is a decent 4-cost you can grab off of a 2-cost Subjugation. Also, Redcap is a fucking evil spirit. How do you fuck that up? I even looked at the Japanese. It's different. How do you have evil spirit and wicked spirit? Just make them the same goddamn thing. Welser's a great example of unrefined design. There are a lot of different ideas that went into crafting him, but none of them are the sole focus. Instead of a nice, streamlined strategy, you're left with a spaghetti mess of an archetype that does a lot of things, but doesn't particularly excel at any of them.